Kia ora. I call the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, like other members on both sides, I rise to support the legislation. And I just say to the member who made an eloquent speech that it is right and proper that we celebrate this development. We celebrate the initiative of and the goodwill of Ngāi Tahu and other community actors within stakeholders within Christchurch. But I got to say to the member who's just resumed his seat that in all the sort of self-glorification that the government shines on this tonight, it is noteworthy to point out that it was not the government that initiated this process, it was not the parliament that initiated this process, it was of course the board, the Riccarton Racing Board, who approached the government with an initiative to do it. So, well, that's true. I mean, nobody could do, the member says couldn't do it without parliament or couldn't do it without the government. Well, that is true, that if you want to progress legislation, this is the only game in town. But it was not an initiative of the government to sort of fly down from Wellington and say, hey, here is a brilliant idea, let's put this in place. No, it was the local people, the local stakeholders, the racing club itself who who came up with a slightly controversial at the time, to be fair, idea, because this is an iconic place within Christchurch. I know it well. I grew up effectively across the road on the north side of Yaldhurst Road in my early years from this. My old man actually taught me how to drive in a Morris Minor in the car park of the Riccarton Racecourse, probably because he was too scared to put me on the road at that time at 15. And have had the odd... Indeed, a wise man, says Mr Goff. We won't talk about his motorbike antics because he's running for mayor. But, and I have had the occasional flutter and was acting Minister of Racing for about 8 hours at a New Zealand Cup at one point. A great, I didn't pick the winner, a great moment in history. But I just say to the member who's just spoken that we should, credit should go where credit is due. And credit is due to the Riccarton Racing folk for this initiative. And it was not without controversy, and it is an iconic part of the Canterbury and Christchurch landscape. In fact, I can regale the house. I'm in danger of becoming John Carter in my latter years, but I can regale the house when my grandmother and grandfather, who harked from Invercargill, my grandfather ran a dubious book, I think, at a business many years ago. So if the member from Invercargill, if I owe her parents any money, sorry, the debt died with my grandfather. But on his wedding honeymoon, he was a great punter, and he brought my grandmother up at Cup Week, housed her in the Riccarton Racecourse pub across the road for the duration of Cup Week, and went from the gallops to the trots, the gallops to the trots, and then after a pretty arduous week, advised his new wife that he'd won enough money to pay for the honeymoon. Suffice to say that my grandmother, who died at 96, hated the races for the rest of her life because of that short and interesting experience. However, look, we support the bill. It will provide a substantial number of houses in an area, but again, I would just point out that whilst it will add to the housing stock, you have to acknowledge in Christchurch that it is late. We're short of a few, but the housing market is over the hump. And in that side of Christchurch, it will provide a gap. Rolleston is not that far down the road. But as Dr Megan Woods and Ruth Dyson and others have said, there are other issues around that side of Christchurch in respect of infrastructure. You can't just plonk 600 houses at, 3.5 on average people per house in a particular area and not deal with infrastructure around Yaldhurst Road and Racecourse Road leading into Johns Road and the Hornby area. And that is a challenge, I think, not only for the Christchurch City Council but also for the government to provide infrastructure resource around that. That has been, in my early years, a pretty sleepy part of Christchurch. Very rare you'd get a traffic jam as I grew up around that part. That will change overnight with this particular development, and resource and infrastructure must follow. So, sir, in the briefest possible way, and having regaled the House with a wonderful couple of personal histrionics, I think this is a very good piece of legislation. It is a chance for local stakeholders, again, I think, to take charge of their own destiny. It will preserve the iconic, as a colleague said, the iconic Riccarton market, which is very, very well established and very well loved right across Christchurch. It will, not as good as Littleton Market. Well, you know, my colleague and I, we don't often disagree in the Labor Party, but, you know, once or twice occasionally we do. And it will preserve the iconic nature that is the Riccarton Racing Club and assist with its financial and fiscal future. So, sir, I think we should expedite this. I don't think there is a lot of drama around it now, but as I conclude my speech, I just make the point again that credit should go where credit is due, and credit is due to local stakeholders and the Riccarton Racing Club, rather than any sort of reflective glory that members of the government would reflect upon themselves during this debate.